court, my ex's lawyer said, "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids. Why should she get them?" The judge nodded. I stayed quiet, holding back tears. Then my 7-year-old.
"Hi, my name is Stephanie. I speak in British English, and in court, my ex's lawyer said, she's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids. Why should she get them?" The judge nodded. I stayed quiet, holding back tears. Then my 7-year-old stood up and said, "Mum, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room fell silent. The judge read it, then looked up shocked. Even my ex went pale. I stood there in court trying not to cry as my ex-husband's lawyer tore me apart in front of the judge. "She's broke. She can't even afford a home or decent food and clothes for the kids," she said with a smirk. "Why should she get them?" I clenched my jaw and stayed quiet. I could feel my hands shaking. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. The judge nodded slowly as if he agreed. That moment felt like the air was being sucked out of my chest. All I could think about were my children, Luca and Aria. What would happen if they were taken from me and handed over to a man who only cared about control and appearances? I couldn't afford a lawyer like his. I couldn't afford anything really. I was barely holding on, but I was here. I showed up, and I was doing everything I could for my kids. Then, just as I felt myself slipping into that quiet panic where your body is still but your thoughts are screaming, my 7-year-old son stood up. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear. "Mom," he said loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" The room froze. Everyone turned. Derek stiffened. His lawyer blinked like she'd just been slapped. Even the judge stopped mid-sentence. I didn't know what letter Luca meant. My heart pounded. He had never said anything about a letter, but I nodded. And as he walked toward the bench with that folded piece of paper in his small hand, everything changed. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat in court afraid to speak. I used to be confident. I had a job I loved, friends I laughed with, dreams that felt real. But when I married Derek, things changed slowly and then all at once. He wasn't always cruel. In the beginning, he was charming, generous and convincing. He told me I didn't need to work. He said I should stay home, raise the kids and let him handle the money. "You've done enough," he said once. "You deserve rest." I didn't realize what I was giving up when I agreed. My independence, my voice, my safety net. I became invisible in my own life. After our daughter Aria was born, Derek started changing. He was always tired, always critical. Every dollar I spent was questioned. If I bought diapers without checking the sale price first, I got silence for hours. If I mentioned going back to work part-time, he'd remind me I didn't have a recent resume, or say, "We don't need your help, we need you to be a good mom." By the time he left, I had nothing. No savings, no lawyer, no one in my corner except my kids. He cut off the joint account and moved in with someone new. He hired a lawyer right away. I couldn't even afford one. I went to the free legal clinic at the county courthouse and stood in line for 2 hours, holding a folder full of receipts and photos of my kids eating box macaroni on paper towels because we didn't have clean dishes. Our apartment was small. I worked 2 cleaning jobs under the table just to stay ahead of the rent. We didn't have cable or internet. I used a prepaid phone and hoped it wouldn't run out of minutes if the school needed to call me. I washed my kids' clothes by hand in the bathtub sometimes. The water heater barely worked, so I'd boil water on the stove and mix it in buckets. Luca never complained. Aria would little songs while I scrubbed her socks. I didn't tell anyone how bad it got, not even my mother. I was too ashamed. She'd warned me about Derek years ago, said he looked at people like they were transactions. But I was too in love back then to listen. When the court date came, I was terrified. Derek had filed for full custody, claimed I was unfit. He said I was unstable, poor, unable to provide a good life. His lawyer was brutal. They brought spreadsheets and photos of his beautiful home. They wore expensive suits and smiled like everything was already decided. I walked into the courtroom with a borrowed dress, a hand-me-down blazer, and a plastic folder with school records, attendance sheets, and a letter from our landlord confirming I'd never missed a payment. I knew it wasn't enough, but I had to try, for Luca, for Aria. That morning, Luca held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps. "Is it going to be okay?" he asked. I smiled, but it felt thin. "Yes, baby, it's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything. All I knew was that I loved my kids. I knew what it was like to go without and still put them first. I knew what it felt like to cry quietly in the bathroom after bedtime so they wouldn't see. I knew how hard I worked to make their little world feel safe when everything around us was shaking. Inside the courtroom, I sat straight and still. I watched Derek avoid eye contact. I listened as his lawyer listed off everything I didn't have: money, stable housing, reliable transportation. She said, her son wears second-hand shoes with holes. Her daughter's teacher says she sometimes skips breakfast. This isn't neglect. This is poverty, and poverty isn't a crime. But it is a risk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, where were you when I was skipping dinner to make sure there was enough cereal left? Where were you when I was selling my wedding ring to buy coats for the winter? But I stayed silent. I had learned that in court, anger doesn't look like strength, it looks like instability. The judge nodded slowly as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank. And just when I felt like I might not make it, the judge nodded slowly, as if every accusation made perfect sense. My heart sank, and just when I felt like I might not make it through the rest of the hearing, I felt that little tug on my sleeve. Luca, my sweet, brave boy. He looked up at me with wide eyes and whispered, "Mom, can I say something to the judge?" The courtroom felt colder the second Derek's lawyer began to speak. Carla Dean walked with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times and expected to win again. She stood tall, her voice loud and clipped as she laid out her version of my life, one stripped of truth, one meant to humiliate. She has no stable employment. She receives inconsistent financial assistance. Her apartment is temporary housing. The children deserve better than a mother who can barely feed them. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could already picture his face blank, relaxed, watching this unfold like he had nothing to do with it, as if my financial ruin wasn't carefully orchestrated by him. He was the one who drained our joint account days before leaving. He was the one who refused to help with bills unless it made him look good in front of his parents. But none of that mattered in that room. The only thing the judge had in front of him were the spreadsheets and photos from Derek's side, pictures of his pristine house, the fully stocked fridge, the private school brochures. Carla flipped through her documents with a quiet rhythm, pulling out my bank statements. She held them up like they were dirty laundry. "Your Honor, as you can see, my client provides a secure, consistent environment. The children have their own rooms, regular meals, a nanny. Meanwhile, Miss Moreau has no documented income, no verified employer. She's behind on utilities, and was issued a warning for late rent in February. This is not a safe or stable situation for 2 young children." I felt my face flush. She didn't mention the fact that I had picked up every job I could, often cleaning houses for cash, because formal work wasn't an option with 2 kids and no childcare. She didn't mention that the rent notice was resolved within days, or that I'd sold everything valuable I had to keep food in the fridge. The judge didn't speak right away. He leaned back, looking down at the papers like they confirmed what he already believed, that I was trying, but trying wasn't enough. I wanted to defend myself, to explain everything, but I also knew how that would look. I had been warned not to interrupt, not to sound defensive, not to cry too much or appear too cold. So I sat there silent, embarrassed, burning with shame and frustration. My fingers dug into the edge of my seat. I kept my eyes on the kids sitting quietly beside me. Aria was drawing on a piece of scratch paper with a dull crayon. Luca was watching Derek with narrowed eyes. Then Carla said the sentence that cut deeper than any insult she had thrown so far. "Why should she get the children if she can't even afford to care for them?" It echoed in my mind. Why should I get them? I held back the tears that were pressing behind my eyes. I knew my reality wasn't impressive on paper. I didn't have new clothes for them. I couldn't afford fancy lunches or ballet classes, but I was there every night. I was the one who brushed their hair, checked for monsters under their beds, and stayed up late hand-sewing patches into their jackets because I couldn't afford new ones. None of that mattered to the court. Only numbers did, numbers I didn't have. The judge looked at me, his eyes heavy with doubt. He opened his mouth as if he was about to speak when I felt it, that small tug on my arm again. "Luca," he whispered, "Mom, can I show the judge the letter I found in Dad's safe?" At first I didn't understand. What letter? I stared at him, confused, until he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. My stomach turned. I didn't know what it was, but something in Derek's posture shifted. He sat up straighter. Carla's eyes locked on the paper. "Luca, what is that?" I asked softly. He didn't answer me. He looked at the judge. "Can I give this to you?" he asked. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Bring it here." Luca stepped forward, small and steady, walked past the row of polished suits and wide eyes, and handed the letter to the judge with both hands. The room fell into a strange, heavy silence. I could see Derek start to sweat. Carla turned to him, whispering something quickly, her confidence faltering for the first time. The judge unfolded the paper. I watched his eyes move across the words. His expression changed slowly. confusion, then realization, then something sharper. He looked up directly at Derek. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "would you like to explain this?" The moment the judge spoke those words, the temperature in the courtroom seemed to shift. Derek's eyes widened. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Carla leaned toward him quickly, whispering again, but this time her voice carried a thread of urgency. Whatever was written on that piece of paper, it had shaken something loose. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, trying to read the judge's face. He held the letter in both hands and looked down at it again. His brow furrowed. Then he read it aloud to Derek Moreau from L. Becker, CPA. Subject, Strategic Financial Shielding, Divorce Prep. Then he paused, glancing at the courtroom, then back at Derek. "This is a financial strategy letter, dated 3 months before your divorce was filed. It details instructions for opening offshore accounts, transferring assets to shell LLCs, and minimizing reported income in order to influence custody and support proceedings. It includes the line, quote, 'Keep primary custody if possible, but at minimum, ensure she has little ground for legal appeal by appearing financially stable and morally sound.'" He stopped reading. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Every eye was now on Derek. Even Carla looked stunned. She turned her head slowly toward him, whispering something that sounded like, "Is this real?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I was frozen between disbelief and a kind of quiet rage that had no outlet. I had suspected things. I knew Derek was strategic, cold when it came to money, and ruthless when it came to getting what he wanted. But to see it in writing, to hear a judge read it out loud in front of my children, was something I never imagined. The judge lowered the letter and placed it neatly on the bench in front of him. Then he looked back at Derek and said, "You were intentionally misleading this court. You've attempted to manipulate the outcome of these proceedings through financial deception. This letter is a direct attempt to use wealth and calculated dishonesty to deny your children access to their mother." Derek stood up abruptly. "That letter is old. It wasn't used." "It's not even sit down, Mr. Moreau," the judge snapped. The authority in his voice startled everyone. Aria looked up from her drawing and reached for my hand. I wrapped my arm around her without looking away from the judge. He turned his attention back to me. "Miss Moreau, were you aware of this letter before today?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "This is the first time I've seen or heard of it." "And your son found it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes, he never mentioned it until now." Luca looked up at me then. "I thought it might help. I found it when I was looking for my tablet at Dad's house. I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but I didn't want us to lose." The judge stared at him for a long moment, then something softened in his expression. "You did the right thing, young man," he said. He turned back to Carla Dean. "I will be reviewing this document in full, and pausing this hearing for a formal inquiry into Mr. Moreau's financial conduct. In the meantime, primary custody will remain with Miss Moreau, with temporary suspension of the defendant's parenting time, until this matter is resolved." The words sank in slowly. I heard them, but my body didn't react at first. It was like my brain needed a moment to make sure I hadn't imagined them. When they finally registered, I felt my knees tremble. I sat down hard, pulling both of my kids into my arms. Carla Dean stood silent, lips pressed together, arms folded tightly. She didn't argue, she couldn't. The damage was done. Derek didn't say another word. After the judge left the bench, the bailiff dismissed the court. I stayed seated, arms wrapped around my children like they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. Luca leaned into me and whispered, "Did I mess up?" "No, baby," I said. "You saved us." He nodded once and didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I finally understood what kind of strength it takes for a child to carry something like that. And I realized something else. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like the truth had a real chance. I walked out of the courtroom that day holding my kids' hands, barely feeling the ground beneath my feet. My legs were moving, but my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying the judge's words in my head, trying to believe them. He had stopped the hearing, he had suspended Derek's parenting time. He had believed me, or at least, he had finally seen the truth for himself. Outside, the air was cold. Luca let go of my hand to zip up Aria's coat. I watched him, feeling a rush of gratitude that I didn't have words for yet. How do you thank a child for something like that? For standing up and doing what no adult in that courtroom had the courage to do? A few days later, the court ordered a formal investigation into Derek's financial activity. I met with a court-appointed investigator, a woman named Miss Trent, who listened carefully, took notes, and never once looked at me like I was less than. She reviewed the letter, asked questions about our finances during the marriage, and requested permission to pull all relevant tax records and asset disclosures from both sides. I agreed without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Derek, on the other hand, did. Within a week, his house of cards started to fall. The investigator uncovered multiple accounts registered to shell companies in Nevada and Delaware. She found wire transfers to overseas banks, cash transactions that were never disclosed, and tax inconsistencies that made it clear he had been hiding income for years. Every time I received an update, I felt something slowly rebuilding inside me, trust in my own memory, confidence in my instincts, and belief that maybe, just maybe, justice could exist. For so long I had been made to feel like I was imagining things. Derek had convinced everyone, including parts of me, that I was weak, paranoid, and incapable. But now the facts were proving otherwise. The final hearing came faster than I expected. When I walked into the courtroom again, this time with legal representation provided by a domestic support advocacy group, I stood taller. I wasn't wearing borrowed clothes. I had found part-time work cleaning offices, and had saved enough for a modest black dress and sturdy heels. Small things, but they felt like armor. Derek looked different too. The confidence was gone. His new lawyer spoke in short, tight sentences. There were no smug glances, no fake smiles. The courtroom had shifted. The judge entered and began the session with a statement. This court has reviewed the financial investigation into Mr. Moreau and finds substantial evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and manipulation of income to gain an advantage in these proceedings. This behavior directly contradicts the best interests of the children involved. He paused and looked down at me. Miss Moreau, in light of these findings and your demonstrated commitment to your children's well-being under difficult circumstances, this court grants you full physical and legal custody of Luca and Aria. Mr. Moreau is ordered to pay backdated child support and will be subject to monitored visitation pending further review. I didn't cry right away. I think part of me was still bracing for the moment to be taken away, for someone to say there was a mistake or a change, but no one spoke. The judge signed the order, the gavel fell. It was real. Aria squealed quietly and hugged my waist. Luca squeezed my hand. He didn't smile, but his eyes were shining steady and sure. That night, we had pancakes for dinner and danced to music on the radio. Nothing fancy. Just us in our tiny kitchen, laughing until the sound filled every corner of the apartment. I sat on the floor afterward holding them both on my lap. Aria was singing. Luca was drawing something on a notepad. When I looked down, I saw what he had written, a picture of a house with 3 stick figures. Above it he'd written, "Home is where Mom is." That letter he found was more than just a piece of evidence. It was a lifeline, a doorway out of fear, and into something that finally felt like peace. He could have hidden it, thrown it away, ignored it, but he didn't. Because even at 7 years old, my son knew right from wrong. And in a courtroom full of adults, he was the one brave enough to tell the truth. It's been 6 months since that day in court, but I still think about it often. Not just the moment the judge ruled in my favor or the look on Derek's face, but the quiet strength it took to get there. The kind of strength that doesn't come from power or money, but from love. The kind that keeps going when everything else is gone. After the ruling, life didn't become perfect. I still worked long hours. I still budgeted every grocery trip down to the last dollar. I still picked up second-hand clothes and clipped coupons and said no to things other families might take for granted. But the fear was gone. The constant pressure, the feeling that someone was waiting to take everything away, that was over. Derek made a few attempts to regain control. He filed a motion to reduce his support payments, then tried to question the monitored visitation requirements. But the evidence was strong, and the court stood firm. He showed up to his scheduled visitations 3 times, then stopped trying. I didn't explain it to the kids in too much detail. I only told them what they needed to know. Their dad wasn't ready to be consistent, and they deserved people who showed up and stayed. They stopped asking after a while. Luca still talks about the letter sometimes. One evening we were sitting on the couch and he asked, was I in trouble for taking it? I shook my head and looked him in the eye. No, baby, you were brave. You told the truth when it mattered most. He nodded like he understood and leaned his head on my shoulder. That moment reminded me of how easily children carry burdens we don't even see. He had carried that piece of paper for weeks. He had waited for the right time to speak. He had chosen justice when no one asked him to. I started going to counseling. At first, it felt strange to talk about everything out loud, to hear myself admit just how bad it had been. But healing needs air. The more I spoke, the more I realized how much I had internalized, the shame, the guilt, the lie that being poor meant I was failing my children, that I had to prove my worth by looking okay, instead of just being honest about how hard it was. My counselor helped me see something I hadn't before. I wasn't weak for struggling. I was strong for surviving, strong for keeping a roof over our heads, for showing up to court without a lawyer, for putting my children first every single day. One weekend, I found a part-time office job that offered benefits. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I took it. I bought a laptop so I could take evening classes online and work toward a certification in bookkeeping. It was something I had always been good at, but never believed I could turn into a real career. The kids started doing better too. Aria made a new best friend at her preschool, and her teacher said she'd become more talkative and confident. Luca joined the school's art club and had one of his drawings put up in the hallway. He chose a picture of a tree with roots, thick and deep. Underneath it he wrote one word, growing. That's what we're doing now, growing. It doesn't always feel fast or easy, but it's steady. Every week, we move a little further from fear, and a little closer to peace. Sometimes people ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't fall apart. The truth is I almost did. But when you're a mother and your babies are on the line, you find a way to keep breathing, to keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up was never an option. This story started in a courtroom with me being accused of being too poor to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest voice in the room. A child who knew what love looked like and wasn't afraid to prove it. We didn't win because we had power or money or perfect appearances. We won because we had honesty, because we stayed kind, and because even when the odds were against us, we refused to break. There's one thing I've learned, it's this: justice doesn't always come easy, but it can still come. And sometimes, when it does, it arrives in the form of a folded letter in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with love. That's the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped surviving and started living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment. Whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice, your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it.
You can't be serious, Dad, I told him when he said I wasn't allowed to be part of our family law firm. This is not up for discussion. I had prepared to be a lawyer during my whole life. The firm goes to your brother. This is not for a woman. A year later he saw the mistake he made. You can't be serious, Dad, I said, my voice trembling as I stared at him across his massive mahogany desk. My father leaned back in his leather chair, calm and composed as always, and let out a slow exhale. This is not up for discussion, Catherine, he said, setting his cigar in the ashtray like the conversation was already over. My fists clenched at my sides, but I refused to back down. So that's it? I asked, my words sharp. You'd rather hand everything over to Grant, someone who doesn't even care, than let me prove myself? All because I'm a woman? He didn't even flinch. This firm is for your brother to manage, Catherine, he said firmly. You've done well with your education, and you'll make a fine wife one day, but this is not your place. My name is Catherine Mercer. I'm 26 years old, a Harvard-educated lawyer, and the daughter of Henry Mercer, owner of Mercer & Associates, one of the most powerful law firms in Dallas. My entire life has been about proving myself, excelling in school, debating my way to the top, graduating with honors, so I could follow in my father's footsteps. But standing there in his office, surrounded by the smell of leather and cigars, I felt my world shift. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much I loved the law. To him, I was just his daughter, someone who was supposed to marry well and stay out of the way. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice steadier now. Grant doesn't care about this firm, Dad. He's reckless. He barely scraped through community college, and he has no idea how to run a business. You know that as well as I do. My father sighed, rubbing his temple like I was the one being unreasonable. Grant will learn. He's my son, Catherine. It's his birthright to take over Mercer & Associates. And you, he paused, his voice softening just slightly. You have other options. A future that doesn't involve the stress of running a firm. I'm protecting you. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Protecting me? I said, shaking my head. You're not protecting me, Dad. You're holding me back. I've earned this. I've worked harder than anyone, including Grant, and you know it. But you won't even give me a chance because you're too stuck in your ways to see what I'm capable of. His expression hardened, and I knew I'd pushed too far. That's enough, Catherine, he said, his voice sharp. We're done here. I stormed out of his office, my heels echoing through the marble halls of our family's estate. My mother was in the parlor, quietly arranging flowers in a vase. She looked up as I passed, her expression soft but tired. Catherine, she said gently, what happened? I stopped, turning to her with a mix of frustration and desperation. He won't let me work at the firm, I said, my voice breaking. He's handing everything over to Grant, and he expects me to smile and accept it. She sighed, her hands stilling over the flowers. Your father, he has his ways, she said, her tone hesitant. But maybe it's best not to push him, dear. He means well. I stared at her, stunned. Means well? I repeated. Mom, he's throwing away everything I've worked for because I'm a woman. How can you stand there and defend that? She lowered her gaze and I could see the years of quiet submission etched into her face. I just don't want to see you hurt, Catherine, she said softly. Sometimes it's easier to let things be. Her words hung in the air, and I realized in that moment that I was on my own. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of my father's words pressed down on me. I thought about everything I'd done to get to this point, late nights poring over case law, the endless debates at Harvard, the sacrifices I'd made to live up to the Mercer name. And for what? To be told I didn't belong? That my only value was to marry into another powerful family? The thought made my stomach turn. The next morning, I was halfway through packing my suitcase when the door to my bedroom creaked open. My mother stood there, her face pale and confused. Catherine, what are you doing? She asked, her voice laced with worry. Before I could answer, my father appeared behind her. His brows furrowed in irritation. What's all this? He demanded, stepping into the room. Where do you think you're going? Grant showed up last, leaning casually against the doorframe, still in his robe. Packing for a vacation, sis? He asked with a smirk. I snapped the suitcase shut and stood tall facing them all. I'm leaving, I said simply. Since I'm not welcome at the firm and apparently don't belong in this family's plans, I'm going to find a place where I do. My father's face darkened and my mother clutched her pearls, looking like she was about to cry. Catherine, she said softly, don't do this. Let's talk about it. But I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. There's nothing to talk about. You've all made your priorities clear. My father's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. Don't be ridiculous, Catherine, he said, his tone cold and dismissive. This is your home. Where else would you go, and for what? To make some sort of point? I met his gaze without flinching. Yes, Dad, I said firmly. To make a point that I'm worth more than being pushed aside for someone who hasn't earned a damn thing? You made it clear last night that I have no place in your firm, so I'll find a firm that values what I bring to the table. Grant let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're really making a big deal out of nothing, Cat, he said, crossing his arms. You're throwing a tantrum just because Dad isn't handing you the keys to the kingdom? His smug tone pushed me over the edge. This isn't a tantrum, Grant, I snapped. It's me taking control of my life, something you've never had to do because everything's been handed to you. My father raised a hand, silencing us both. Enough, he said sternly. Catherine, you're not leaving. You belong here with your family. I shook my head, picking up my suitcase. No, Dad. I belong somewhere I'm valued, and clearly that's not here. I walked past them, my suitcase rolling behind me as I made my way down the grand staircase. My mother followed, her voice trembling. Catherine, please don't go, she said softly. We can figure this out as a family. I stopped at the base of the stairs and turned to look at her, the woman who had spent her life swallowing her own voice to keep the peace. Mom, I said gently, I love you, but I can't keep pretending that things will change if I stay. They won't. My father stood at the top of the stairs watching silently, his face unreadable. Grant leaned against the banister, clearly unfazed, like my departure meant nothing. I opened the front door and turned back one last time. When you're ready to treat me like more than just a daughter who needs to marry well, you know where to find me, I said, my voice calm but firm. Then I walked out, the crisp morning air hitting my face as I closed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I didn't look back after leaving that house. Within days, I secured an interview at one of the most respected law firms in Dallas. They didn't care that I was a Mercer. All they cared about were my credentials and my drive. When I walked into that office, I wasn't Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, Harvard graduate and determined attorney. By the end of the week, they offered me a position. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere for what I could do, not for who I was. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I thrived in an environment where I wasn't constantly being compared to someone else. My new boss, a sharp and modern man named Richard Hayes, took me under his wing. He valued my insight and pushed me to take on more responsibility. Within a few months, I was handling high-profile cases and earning the respect of my colleagues. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself growing up, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. As much as I was thriving professionally, the nights were harder. Cutting ties with my family wasn't easy, no matter how justified it felt. There were moments, quiet ones, like coming home to an empty apartment after a long day, when the weight of it all would hit me. I missed my mother's gentle presence even if she never stood up for me. I even missed the chaos Grant brought to the house, as infuriating as he was. But what hurt the most was knowing my father didn't think twice about letting me go. Months passed and I poured everything I had into my work. The cases were demanding, often leaving me in the office late into the night, but I thrived under the pressure. With each victory, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a lawyer anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. Richard Hayes, my boss, started assigning me to more high-stakes cases. And soon, I was gaining a reputation as one of the firm's rising stars. The growth wasn't just professional. It was personal too. I learned to stand on my own, to make decisions without worrying about whether they would please my father or fit into the mold my family had crafted for me. Every step forward felt like proof that I was more than they had ever given me credit for. I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. I was Catherine Mercer, and I was making a name for myself on my own terms. One afternoon, Richard called me into his office. It was spacious but unpretentious, a reflection of the man himself. He gestured for me to take a seat and leaned back in his chair, his piercing blue eyes studying me intently. "Catherine," he began, his tone measured, "I have a case I think you're ready for. It's high stakes, complicated, and it's going to put you in the spotlight." I nodded, intrigued. "What's the case?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "We're representing a client in a major litigation against Mercer and Associates. They're suing your father's firm for negligence in a contract dispute. The stakes are enormous, and the case is gaining attention." He paused, watching my reaction closely. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "You want me to represent someone suing my father's firm?" I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard nodded. "I know it's personal, Catherine, but that's exactly why I want you on this. You know how Mercer and Associates operates, and you're one of the sharpest lawyers we have. If anyone can win this case, it's you." I took a deep breath, trying to process what he was asking. "Richard," I said slowly, "you realize what this could mean for me personally and professionally. This isn't just another case, it's my family." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I understand that," he said firmly, "but this is your chance to show what you're capable of, to take on the people who underestimated you and prove them wrong. Think about it, Catherine. This could be the defining case of your career." I sat back in the chair, the weight of the offer settling heavily on my shoulders. "This is a lot to take in," I said, my voice quieter now. Richard nodded, his expression understanding. "I don't expect you to decide right here and now. It's a big ask, Catherine, and I know how personal this is for you." I met his gaze, grateful for his patience. "Would it be all right if I sleep on it?" I asked, my tone more measured. "I need to think about how this could affect everything. Not just my career," but I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Take all the time you need," Richard said, his voice steady. "But don't take too long. We need to move fast on this, and I want you on the team. Let me know by the end of the day tomorrow." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything at stake. Taking the case meant going up against my father, the man who had dismissed me and handed everything to Grant without a second thought. It also meant going head-to-head with my family's legacy. The name that had opened so many doors for me, even as it closed others. But it also meant proving once and for all that I could stand on my own, even if it meant burning the last remaining bridge to my family. For 2 days I went back and forth, weighing the risks and rewards. I thought about my father's cold dismissal of everything I'd worked for, about my mother's quiet resignation, and about Grant's smug sense of entitlement. But I also thought about the chance to show everyone that I wasn't just Henry Mercer's daughter. By the end of the second day, I made up my mind. I walked into Richard's office the next morning, my shoulders squared and my voice steady. "I'll take the case," I said simply. His face lit up with approval. "I knew you would," he said with a grin. "Now let's get to work." The day of the first litigation proceeding arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable as I entered the courtroom. I clutched my briefcase tightly, my heels clicking against the polished floor with every step. My client walked beside me, confident in my abilities, but all I could think about was the moment I knew was coming. As I approached the front of the courtroom, I saw them, my father and Grant, sitting at the opposing table. Their faces turned toward me, and as soon as our eyes met, I felt their shock hit like a tidal wave. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. Grant's mouth fell open slightly before he quickly masked his surprise with a smug smirk, though I could see the unease in his expression. I set my briefcase on the table and met their stares head-on. I wasn't going to look away or falter. I was here to do a job, and nothing, not their surprise, not their disapproval, was going to throw me off. For a brief moment my father's gaze softened, but he quickly composed himself, leaning over to whisper something to Grant. I didn't care what he said. I was ready. As the proceedings began, I slipped into my role seamlessly. Every motion, every argument, every document I presented was executed with precision. I kept my tone calm, my demeanor collected, and my focus solely on the case. When the judge addressed me, I responded with confidence, never faltering under the weight of my father's presence or Grant's smug glances. I wasn't Catherine, the daughter or sister in that room. I was Catherine Mercer, attorney for the plaintiff, and I intended to win. Even when Grant fumbled through his arguments clearly unprepared, I didn't let it show on my face. I treated him as I would any opposing counsel, with respect but zero leniency. Every time he misspoke or misrepresented a fact, I countered with clarity, backing up my points with solid evidence and case law. My father sat quietly for most of it, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to earn his approval anymore. I was there to do my job, and I was doing it well. After a few sessions, it became painfully obvious, at least for my father and Grant, that I was dominating the case. Every argument Grant brought to the table crumbled under the weight of my counterpoints. His inexperience was glaring, and my preparation left him scrambling for answers he didn't have. My father tried to step in once or twice, but even he couldn't salvage the damage Grant had done. The tide was turning fast, and everyone in the room knew it. By the fourth session, their side proposed a settlement. I could see the frustration etched into my father's face as their counsel approached mine with the terms. After a few back-and-forth adjustments, we agreed to a resolution that heavily favored my client. As the paperwork was signed, I caught my father glancing at me from across the room. He looked defeated, maybe even regretful. Grant, on the other hand, avoided my gaze entirely, staring at the table like a chastised schoolboy. I didn't say a word to either of them. My work here was done, and I had proven exactly what I'd set out to. But usually when a session ended, I would stay behind to wrap up with my client and exchange pleasantries with the other lawyers. It was something I always did, a small gesture of professionalism and respect, regardless of how contentious the case might have been. But this time there was no opportunity. My father and Grant had already gathered their things and left the room without so much as a glance in my direction. No handshake, no word of acknowledgement, not even a curt, "well done." It stung more than I wanted to admit. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped for some kind of recognition, some small sign that they'd seen what I was capable of and respected it. Instead, they walked away silent and defeated, leaving me standing there with the weight of unfinished business pressing on my chest. I took a deep breath, brushed it off and refocused on my client. I had won the case. That was what mattered. That evening back at the firm, my colleagues greeted me with applause as I walked through the doors. Richard was the first to approach, clapping me on the shoulder with a proud grin. "Well done, Catherine," he said, raising a glass of champagne. "You were flawless in there. That settlement is a big win for us, and your client couldn't have asked for a better advocate." The team had set up a small celebration in the break room, complete with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. My client even stopped by to express their gratitude, shaking my hand firmly. "You were incredible, Catherine," they said. "We couldn't have done this without you." For the first time that day I let myself smile. Surrounded by people who valued me for my skills and hard work, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no words from my father or Grant could have given me. This was my victory and I owned it. Later that night, alone in my apartment, the glow of the city lights filtered through the blinds as I sat by the window with a glass of wine. The adrenaline from the day had worn off, and in the quiet, my thoughts drifted back to my family. I replayed the courtroom moments in my head, the way my father's face tightened with every argument I made. The way Grant couldn't even look me in the eye when it was over. I had expected them to be angry or defensive, but the silence they left me with was harder to bear. For years I had dreamed of earning my father's respect, of proving to him that I was worthy, not just of his name, but of a place in the firm I had once idolized. And now, even after winning a case against them, I wasn't sure what I had achieved. Did they finally see me for who I was, or was I just a reminder of their failure? The questions lingered unanswered as I stared out at the Dallas skyline, wondering if the ties I'd cut could ever truly be mended. The next morning as I walked into the office, the usual buzz of conversation and ringing phones greeted me. I barely had time to settle in before Richard approached, a curious look on his face. "Catherine," he said, his tone cautious but warm. "Your father is here. He's waiting in your office." The words stopped me in my tracks. "My father?" I asked, trying to keep my expression neutral, though my stomach flipped. Richard nodded. "He came in about 20 minutes ago, said he wanted to speak with you. Take your time. I'll hold your calls." I thanked him, though my mind was already racing as I made my way down the hall. When I opened the door to my office, there he was, Henry Mercer, sitting in the chair across from my desk, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, though the slight furrow in his brow betrayed something. "Regret, maybe?" "Catherine," he said simply, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I closed the door behind me, unsure of what to expect. "Dad," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What are you doing here?" He stood up slowly, brushing his hands down his suit jacket as though trying to steady himself. "I came here to talk," he said, his tone measured but serious. "To say some things I should have said already." I walked over to my desk, setting my bag down carefully. "All right," I said, folding my arms. "I'm listening." He hesitated, glancing out the window before turning back to me. "You were brilliant in that courtroom, Catherine," he began, his voice softening. "I've seen a lot of lawyers in my time, some of the best in the business, and what you did, it was remarkable. You were prepared, professional, and relentless. You left no doubt about who the better lawyer was." His words caught me off guard, but I kept my expression steady, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent so much of my life believing that legacy meant keeping things the way they used to be," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "That a son should take over what the father built. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing Grant to step up, even when I knew deep down he wasn't ready or willing." He ran a hand through his silver hair, sighing deeply. "But I see now that I've been wrong. You've worked harder than anyone, Catherine. You've earned everything you have, and I failed to recognize that. I failed you." I blinked, unsure how to respond. This was the man who had spent years dismissing my ambition, telling me to settle for a life that didn't match my dreams. And now he was standing here admitting he was wrong. "Why now?" I finally asked, my voice steady but cautious. "Why are you telling me this now after everything that's happened?" He met my gaze, his blue eyes filled with an honesty I hadn't seen before. "Because I saw what you're capable of," he said simply. "And I realized I've been a fool. Grant isn't ready, and he may never be. But you've proven you have what it takes, not just to succeed but to lead." He stepped closer, his tone almost pleading. "Catherine, I'm asking you to come back, to take your rightful place at Mercer and Associates. The firm needs you. I need you." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long fighting for this moment, dreaming of hearing those words from him. But now that they were here, I wasn't sure if I wanted them. "What about Grant?" I asked finally. "What happens to him?" My father's face tightened, and he nodded slowly. "Grant will stay, but he'll take on a role more suited to his skills. This is about you, Catherine. It's about giving you what you've always deserved." I took a deep breath, letting his words settle for a moment. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "It's not something I can decide right away. A lot has happened, and I need a few days to figure out what's best for me." My father nodded, his expression serious but understanding. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. I'm not asking for an answer today. I just needed to say my piece. He moved toward the door, but before he left, he turned back to face me. Catherine, he said, his tone softer now. I know I haven't said this enough or maybe ever, but I am proud of you. Watching you in that courtroom, you were better than I ever was. Better than I could have imagined. His words hit me harder than I expected, and for a moment I just stared at him, unsure of how to respond. He gave me a small, almost hesitant smile before turning and walking out of the office, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat at my desk, his words echoed in my mind, better than I ever was. For so long I had fought to prove myself to him, to show that I was more than just his daughter. That I was capable, strong, and deserving of respect. And now, hearing those words, I felt a surge of pride that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about him anymore. I was proud of myself for standing my ground, for thriving on my own, and for showing the world and my father exactly what I was capable of. Now it's late at night, and I'm lying in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about what to do. My father's offer is everything I've worked for, everything I thought I wanted, but going back would mean stepping into a world where I was once dismissed, where I'd have to navigate the shadows of old wounds and fractured trust. It would mean working alongside Grant, knowing how little he values what we both stand to represent. And yet, staying where I am has its own challenges. This firm has been good to me, and I've grown here in ways I never imagined. But it's not my legacy. It's not Mercer & Associates, the place I dreamed of running since I was a little girl. If I go back, I'd have a chance to shape that legacy on my terms, to prove that the name belongs to me just as much as anyone else. I haven't made up my mind yet. The choice feels impossible, and the weight of it keeps me awake. But maybe you can help. What would you do in my situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Hey there, did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, and make sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.